friends, and welcome to the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. I'm Ashley Cipoletti, your host, and I'm on a mission to create more connection. Dogs are really just the starting point. Together, we'll explore how to live with more harmony, ease, and healing so we can show up more as the best version of ourselves, not just for our dogs, but also for our community and our planet too. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you again for your support. And for today, I wanted to dive deep into understanding how stress affects the body, because this information, I believe, has the power to drastically empower you once you know it. And I think it can sound overwhelming and anxiety inducing when you learn it. You're like, oh my God, like stress is like affecting everything and can make you so sick and like can kill you. And we hear about this a lot, I think in media, or at least the media I consume. So can't say what everyone else listens to, but I feel like a lot of the content I'm consuming is all about like these systems. And I again want to approach it from an empowering lens. So it's important to be, I think, educated on what can be going on, and also understand like we can't just avoid stress in life. Like part of being alive is inherently experiencing some stress. And I think some terms get thrown around in media or social media really willy-nilly and can be misconstrued. So I want to preface this and say, like, don't take anything I say as law. A lot of it is pulled from like peer-reviewed articles that I'm reading from, or from credible websites that you can check out on your own as well. This is certainly not my expertise. Like I have a background in behavioral science and find this really, really interesting and important. But I also just want to like disclose this, that by no means do I have my like PhD on this topic. So if anything I'm saying, you're like, I don't know, like look into it yourself. I encourage you to. But again, I want to go through this in an empowering way, because this has really impacted my own life. And looking at it in this way makes me feel like I have more control over my outcomes by having this awareness of what I'm doing to my body and my mind. And also gives me more empathy and understanding of what other individuals could be going through in their bodies and minds, including our animals. And understanding that, I don't know, there's just no need to apply more stress to life. It's like we have a lot going on. And I think the more that we can figure out ways to decrease overall stress, the better, while understanding kind of the differences of acute and chronic stress, and why acute stress can be a good thing. But if it's like over and over and over and over again, and we don't have time to recover, then it turns into chronic stress. And that's where a lot of these problems happen. And chronic stress can literally like kill you, because it's putting so much pressure on the body's systems, which also impact your mood. And I think your personality at a certain point. And it's a really interesting thing to think about, of like, whoa, like how much am I actually in control of? And I think if we look at it big picture, we can start to play around with making different choices where we can, that can have a big impact on us. And once we get clever with this, doing this for animals too, of how can we again reduce some unnecessary stressors. Okay, and before we go into the like nerdy little sciencey bit, I want to start off with a story to paint this picture for you of the importance of it. And it's very, very personal to me. I've shared it not on this podcast, but on an episode I was a guest on before. So some of you might be familiar with it. Some of you might not. But there was a point when I was working at an animal shelter where one of the dogs that we had in our care passed away from stress, more or less. Like we saw her deteriorate rapidly from it, and ultimately had to make a like quality of life decision, which was really, really awful and terrible. And that's not going to be what this podcast is about, but it painted the picture for me crystal clear that being in a stressful environment, and to this dog, this kennel was incredibly stressful for her. She couldn't sleep, so she would go days without sleeping and was just barking at her kennel, excessively drooling, pupils dilated. She was a senior dog at this point and spent her whole life in and out of the shelter. I could see her record ever since she was a puppy. And she had skin issues. She got like kidney issues, urinary tract issues, and just looked like like everything in her body just looked so inflamed. So we did what we could to reduce stress and helped a little bit by, like having her stay in my office and giving her more access to enrichment and outdoor walks and things like that. But ultimately, she was a long-term resident of ours and no one asked to adopt her, which is a story for a topic for another time. This one, I want to just focus more on how this plays a role in animals, certainly as well. And the whole concept of what's called enrichment is like trying to give essentially captive animals these basically like a way for them to do natural behaviors that reduces stress. So then you start to see them like actually reproduce in captivity or like just improve their overall well-being. And so back in the day before zoos were doing research or there was any credibility, it was honestly kind of sad and horrific what people were doing. We didn't know. I don't think people knew any better. So animals were thrown in cages and not cared for and were dying from stress and not reproducing. They were getting depressed. And that really was what created this term enrichment, where now it's like we give dogs licky mats and Kongs and snuffle mats and things like that. But that wasn't a part of normal conversation and for not until very recently. So something to consider. And I also think this plays a role too if you look into our prison system and you see how if people are like feeling terrified and they're locked up and they're not having access to do things that make them feel better, how it can increase aggression and reduce overall quality of life. And I'm sure, I don't know any studies on this, but I'm sure also increase risk of illness. So something to think about. And this, again, topic very near and dear to me. I've had my own issues with chronic stress affecting me where the same time as my office dog struggling with it, I also was struggling with it in my home environment and got to a point where this was the first time like the really, really severe symptoms that I could no longer ignore came up with my chronic illness known as endometriosis. And at the time I didn't know what it was. And yeah, I couldn't stand, I couldn't really walk or eat. I was taking like 800 milligrams of ibuprofen a day just to be able to get out of bed. And it was impacting like my skin. My skin was breaking out, like GI stuff, like just like everything in my body was so angry. And it made me feel so low energy and sad and just made me feel awful. And impacted how I slept. Like everything was just awful. So I didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight, I'm like, I was so stressed. That was the most stressed I've ever been in my life. And it signaled the alarm in my body. And all of these things were just not working right until I made some changes. And, maybe it's the butterfly effect. It brought me here and led me to many, many years of being desperate, looking for answers, going to different doctors and specialists, and not much helping at all. I tried elimination diets. I tried everything like fasting. I tried so much and just kept falling short of really like anything that was sustainable until I found just like one time this book that was recommended to me, and actually it has drastically changed my life. I'll include it in the show notes, but it's specifically on healing endometriosis, kind of as a systematic process, and talks a lot about nutrition and things like that. It was really, really helpful. I still struggle with my symptoms with it from time to time, but for the most part, I'm significantly better than I was. So that's kind of my personal why. And now I want to dive into the more science heavy part of the episode, which is going through like how stress affects the systems of the body. And I encourage you to really look into anything that catches your interest, or if you're like, I want to know more about that, look into it. This is meant to spark an idea in you, and I hope just help people understand like all of these effects and how crucially important it is to, again, just make choices that love you back, and looking at the world through this lens for our animals too. All right, so diving in, it's just first, again, important to really understand the difference between chronic and acute stress. Acute is typically referring to like short-term stress. So for example, if you fall off your bike, acute stress would be how your body handles falling off the bike. Whereas chronic stress is prolonged states of stress. So that could be if you are in an adverse situation, if you are, living in a crisis or a war, or with somebody who could be potentially abusive, or if you are just chronically feeling stressed. Maybe your job is incredibly stressful. Maybe, the people that you live with are always yelling and fighting. It's going to look different for everyone. It doesn't just mean like what people call to like it's capital T trauma, like these things that almost everyone would say like that's a catastrophic like trauma event. It can also just be like whatever your body is perceiving as stressful. So it's going to look different for everyone. And again, the difference between acute and chronic is acute is short term, chronic is long term. A few examples of acute or chronic stress in relation to our dogs could be a dog in acute stress typically is, let's say, like maybe they're learning to go on an obstacle course for the first time and they're doing agility. And the first time they try it out, they're nervous. That would be acute stress. It's short term. Where long term stress could maybe look like a dog that was used to being an only dog in the household, and somebody adopts a new dog that kind of stresses the old dog out a lot, stealing all of its toys, not really letting him have attention or a lot of needs met, and he's living with him. Or maybe that dog, the new dog, scares the old dog constantly because he's always threatening and posturing to have conflict with the dog. So because that's not just one short-term incident, it may be if the former resident dog like ran into this dog at a dog park one time, that would be an acute stressful incident. But living with this new dog and they're constantly in conflict, or maybe that new dog's just impacting on his ability again to have things that help him feel good and feel safe, now that's turning into chronic stress for that dog. Okay, now that we understand the difference between chronic and acute stress, which is important because a lot of times everything's just thrown into like, this is stress and all stress is bad. And it's like, no, we all experience stress, and our body's systems to handle stress are really helpful. And that's how we're able to like get anything done and grow. And same for our dogs. And we need some of these systems I'm going to talk about shortly to even wake up. So again, to experience acute stress is to be alive. Chronic stress, however, is the problematic one, where it's really making the body believe that it is in like constant danger and it's never really recovering. So all of these systems that are going to be in place to keep your organs safe, to protect you, to guard you, or to help get you ready to take action and be successful in survival are always alarming on. And so that means then we're always going to be tensing up, like our muscles tense up to keep us safe if we fall. But if we're chronically stressed, they're just tensing and can develop even into migraines and headaches. And we see that in dogs too. But how would you know if a dog has a headache? You arguably wouldn't. They can't tell you. But you see this commonly. Dogs will have like a cracked tooth from chewing on something, go into the vet, get that fixed, and suddenly the dog's aggression goes away or reactivity goes away. I've seen this actually probably several times with clients where the cause of their irritability or reactivity was due to what I believe is probably paired with like migraines and the actual pain of the tooth, just causing always this kind of nerve and system inflammation. So sometimes our bodies have these responses from injuries, and sometimes from, again, perceived stress and threats, and sometimes from actual threats and stress too. So the perception is just as important as if it was the reality. And that's hugely important to think about in relation to our dogs, because we might know that they're safe at a given moment, but if they don't perceive that they are safe, their body is signaling off like that alarm system to be in that like fight or flight, or get the body ready to take action, which again, it's going to look a little bit different for every dog, but typically like their muscles are tensing. It's going to impact how they're breathing, how much cortisol and adrenaline's going through the body, just like it would with you or me. And these systems, when we're stressed, it's truly like a whole body issue, body and mind, because the brain talks to the body. The brain is a part of the body. And so it signals directly to our gut to say like, if we are in danger, if we need to save our energy. And it's also connecting to our liver, which helps basically like get everything ready to pump those like adrenaline and cortisol hormones going. So it's like, again, all these different systems are going. And that's typically why if someone's in a chronic state of stress, they have skin issues, gut issues, as well as typically anxiety. It's very common. Humans too. And with all my like health issues, I can tell you right off the bat, like gut, skin and brain, very, very connected. And on the days where my like gut is particularly bad, it makes me like bloat, makes my skin horrendous, and makes me feel really anxious and low energy and fatigued. So again, all very connected. So again, kind of in plain language, a lot of the systems affected by this stress are going to be like our muscles tensing, our heart rate changing, our breathing changing, our hormones are influenced and changing, even our reproductive health is changing, our gut is affected, our brain is affected. Truly like every single part of the system you could think of is going to be affected by both acute and chronic stress. And if you think of all of the things in a given day that could signal a stress response, and honestly count that. So what I have some clients do is make like a trigger tracker for their dog of like all of the things that stress them out on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And we're looking at like how frequently these stressors are occurring, and having them kind of guess if they had to label like what feels like a more extreme stressor to their dog, compared to some that might feel more moderate or mild. And then sometimes I'll also have the humans do this for themselves too, of like thinking whether or not they feel comfortable sharing it with me, but like thinking of all of the things that are stressing them out. And if what ones that are connected to their dog, I can kind of help problem solve with them too, of figuring out like how can we reduce these daily stressors, daily, weekly, or monthly stressors, for the owner and also for the dog. And this can help not only grow their relationship, but reduce the amount of like hits to your stress response per day, per week, per month. And again, acute stress, not necessarily bad. Again, sometimes it's good, but if we are having lots of different acute stressors every single day, then that is going to be honestly like it should signal a red flag. And this is why a lot of times I see dogs that have aggression or reactivity. I'm looking at their daily routines or these daily triggers or things like that. Because so often they are protecting the home all day. So owners will be like, oh yeah, they just like bark out the window like all day. And each time they're barking, that's signaling that stress response to the body. So if your dog is just sitting all day barking out the window, barking at the backyard, and then barking on leashes, understanding what's happening to their internal system, it's like that's like not really that's not acute anymore. That's becoming chronic. And while the behavior is normal, like barking at, strangers who are approaching the house is a relatively normal behavior for dogs, it can be detrimental to their overall health and can be frustrating to live with when that's happening. So sometimes implementing strategies where maybe we put like this window adhesive to blur out what they can see, but the light can come out, and now the dog's not barking out the windows all day, can drastically help reduce overall stress levels. So then the dogs are able to sleep during the day because they're not on alert. Then they're able to recover. then maybe their gut starts to heal. Then they're able to learn more. Now the relationship is improving with the owners. Now they're fighting less. Like it has this effect, like a domino effect. When we get really good at figuring out these stressors and how we can eliminate or reduce unnecessary ones or ones that are happening on a daily, particularly a daily or a weekly basis. And when you have the eyes to see this, it's kind of cool to think about. And even this is a slightly controversial topic. A lot of people on social media are like, is fetch good or bad? And yada, yada, yada. I don't believe in really using the terminology good or bad. I'm like, let's look at like, what are the outcomes? Like, what's the effect that this is having? And tracking data. I'm like, let's just get rid of the words good or bad. And for some dogs, I think it's really helpful for like quality of life. They get to run, they get to move, have their species needs met. That's a podcast episode for another time. And for others, I think the effect, again, that fetch is having on the body is producing adrenaline, and they're getting ready to take action, to chase, right? So that's obviously very fun for a dog. But if they're already at chronic states of stress and having like way too much of their adrenals like pumping off, that can be a contributor, because now we're adding more to that. If it was a science experiment, I'm like, whoa, let's first like reduce some of these levels before, or figuring out ways how to implement maybe fetch in a softer way that allows for more recovery can be helpful. So it's not fetch being bad, but it's in some cases contributing to chronic stress because of, like, if you look at the effects of just chasing and running and sprinting is like adrenaline's pumping through the body, which is not bad. But again, part of this science or math equation here can be throwing off those internal systems a bit. And so that's why it's very nuanced, everything in here, but cool if you think about it in this lens. And again, for us, if we are even like thinking about the impact that the gut brain axis has. This is so, and technically gut skin brain axis. It's so fascinating to me. They now know that there are neurons in your gut. Typically, we always thought neurons were like just in your brain, of how the brain communicates to each other, but that you have neurons also in your gut that are communicating to your brain and to each other in the gut. And you have tons of bacteria. And the bacteria has been shown to influence mood and emotions. And the foods that you eat impact the bacteria in your gut. And also, if you have a lot of inflammation going on, can weaken the intestinal barrier, which allow for that gut bacteria to seep out of the intestines and gut into the rest of the body, creating bad bacterial infections or just bacteria going where it shouldn't, where now your body has to fight that off. Commonly like referred to as like leaky gut syndrome and things like that. So fascinating. And thinking about what we're eating is contributing to our mood. And when I worked in mental health, I didn't like prescribe or do anything like that, but I worked with prescribers, and I remember them talking a lot about nutrition to clients with schizophrenia, and talking about how like omega-3s can be really supportive, but like sugars could exacerbate things and make it worse, and kind of signal to the body like it's in this like fight or flight more, which then can signal sometimes just some of these like episodes or kind of psychosis coming on board a little bit stronger. So it was just interesting hearing it there too, and also learning it and thinking about how this applies to dogs, of like, wow, the food that they're eating, how could that impact their mood? I don't have any information on that, but it's something I think about all the time. So if anyone else is also a geek about this, feel free to send me what you know, or if you have any guests that you recommend I bring onto the pod, love to talk about it, because it's just something that we don't typically consider. Everyone's always very behavior focused, of like, you reward this, you punish that. And while yes, we learn through consequences, it's also a interesting thing to think about, of like, what's influencing our mood, our personality, and our behaviors, and thinking about like just the power of the gut. And even on the timing of when we eat, I learned this in my healing journey with endometriosis and in this book. But if we wake up and immediately have coffee or sugar, it impacts these like blood sugar like drops and crashes, and also like cortisol responses. So that the timing of what you eat and when you eat also is influencing, again, mood and this potentially chronic states of stress. And then if we are on this soapbox, this just kept blowing my mind the more I went into this wormhole, talking about like high intensity interval training's been really like this big hit in that was a little pun, this big hit in the fitness industry, and it impacts men and women very differently. And there's been studies showing for women that have endometriosis or have conditions similar to it, that it actually is really detrimental because your body's already in this chronic state of high stress. And so like high intensity interval training is like pumping your body more with more cortisol and adrenaline, all these things that you don't need more of. You're like, no, you need like to get that out of your system and to help that. So while movement and exercise is good and acute stress and working out is good, like weightlifting is still good for women with endo, but thought that was fascinating, where I used to do HIIT workouts all the time, especially when I was feeling my worst, I was doing them. And when I learned that, I was like, whoa, same with even some of the cold plunge work, can be very beneficial and healthy for a lot of individuals. And if you have like endometriosis, or especially again for women, it's a little bit different. It can impact those systems just differently. So much nuance. I'm by no means an expert in these systems and in health, but I learned about them and I've applied it to my life, and I see it and apply it with clients, and it's insane, just the effects it can have. And that's where I was like, the awareness can be empowering, because so much of it is like, oh my God, like stress says all these horrible things and what can we do? But the more that you have this awareness, it can influence these choices you make, where then you can maybe eat like more nutritious foods that love you back, or understand or look into this more if it interests you, of the timing of when you eat. Because if you think about it, if you just ate like gummy worms and Diet Coke all day, every day, nothing else, of course you would get sick. And of course your body would have these responses. So it's like, of course nutrition impacts our mood and our health. But we also need to then just apply that big picture and remember that our pets don't get to choose what they're eating. So staying curious, I don't know, like this is the food that dogs need to eat, but it's really, again, not ruling it out. So anytime I'm working with complex cases, I'm not ruling out pain. I'm not ruling out nutrition. I'm doing what I can in my facet, but I'm also like considering that if we hit a wall, those are two places that are worth exploring. And more often than not, in these tricky cases, you see lots of other signs of inflammation in these dogs, where their gait is abnormal. They're walking a little bit stiffer or different. You see different signs of pain. You almost always see skin issues, very, very common. So yeah, I'm, a little bit of a ramble, but this is an interesting topic, and I could go into it in more and more detail, but I didn't want to make this too in depth, because I want to make it relatable and I want to make it bite-sized enough that you can digest it, process it, think about it, and understand that, again, it's connected. So sometimes things aren't just somebody being a jerk or an a-hole just because. There could be like underlying inflammation and pain and discomfort influencing their mood and energy levels and hormones and all of this. So bringing this back to dogs, I think this also fuels my ethics and how I train. This is a safe space for anybody who wants to listen, but I fully believe if all of these, I feel like a lot of our domesticated animals and dogs are living in situations that are more stressful to them, I think, than we realize for a lot of dogs. And we're like, well, you're actually safe. You have a roof over your head, you have constant meals. And again, we have to think of like just perceived stress too. And a lot of times, again, they're not able to really like fully meet their own needs. So what happens is either dogs put in situations where they're not able to really rest and recover, or implement self-regulation skills like we've talked about before. And so I'm like, okay, if they're in situations that are just kind of high stress all the time and not really recovering. Why would I want to train in a way that is adding more stress to suppress a behavior? And so, anytime again, if we think back into these systems in the body, one of them is the muscular skeletal system. So if we're jerking back on our dog's bodies harshly with like leash pops and things like that, that is stressing the body out. Like you are adding tension to the body because the dog has to brace for impact and is like, whoa. And every time you're doing those leash pops and leash corrections, it's adding some stress again to the body, and it can potentially injure them as well, or fire off actual pain. So if they have neck or back pain or injuries, or sometimes even hip and things like that, that's all connected. Same with if they have a gentle leader on and go and lunge at something and they get whiplash backwards, that's cranking the neck in a way, impacting sometimes just the stress and pain response. So any of the equipment we're using in training can influence our dog's physical and mental bodies. Even if they're on a flat collar and you're doing leash pops, or if they're like pulling constantly, that is adding tension to the body. So I find walking either with longer leashes or finding a way to meet a dog's need to get some of that energy out before a walk, or hiring a trainer to help teach your dog to do loose leash walking without relying on tools that injure them, to be really helpful. Because if your dog's pulling the whole time, again, we're just kind of increasing some stress responses in the body that are unnecessary. That's a fix. And so it might feel like, if you hire somebody for reactivity help, it might feel like, how is this going to work on that goal? This is just, like walking nicely on a leash. But it's reducing something which again was creating a lot of tension on the body, which can signal some of these body systems that we were talking about. And same with if you're using shock collars, you're adding moments of stress to stop a behavior. So it's something to consider. I know there are different ways people use that. It's not what this podcast episode is going to be about. But thinking about the way that we're training, you can also use positive reinforcement in a stressful way. That's also a topic for another time. And thinking about for harnesses, I see this a lot with clients I work with, and I talk with them about this, and I don't like force change on my timeline. I just mention it when I see it and encourage and support. But there are some harnesses that can impact gait and range of motion and cause injuries on dogs that also can contribute to chronic stress. So thinking about that, and thinking about too, like the situations that we're putting our dogs in, are if a dog is having a lot of these like reactions and things like that, and you're bringing them to parties all the time. Parties are things that dogs are not recovering and resting in, and can, again, that scenario, depending on how often you're doing it, can contribute. Doesn't mean that always bringing your dog to a party is always bad. But again, usually most dogs that are at parties are pretty stressed. Sometimes they're having their fun and they're just like, wow. Again, there's nuance, but if we're really like trying to get to the root of some of these behaviors that are stress responses, looking at things like that could be hidden culprits. Or even if it's like you go and adopt a dog, and then before you've brought them home, you've taken them to PetSmart and grandma's house and a party to meet all your friends, they were living in a state of chronic stress, likely from before the shelter to get there, and then in the shelter is stressful. Even in the best shelters, it's inherently different and change and stressful and not on their timeline. That again, to take them immediately to this kind of overstimulating place can sometimes contribute to just more and more stress. We're looking at, again, not eliminating stress entirely. It's not bad. And some of these things acutely and done with enough time where individuals can recover and rest, totally fine. But if we're like, oh my gosh, we're just seeing basically a dog's behavior suddenly getting worse and worse over time, that's a sign usually that there's chronic stress going on. And looking at some things outside of the box and tracking it, getting curious. I've had a couple clients where we had to change a few things of, okay, let's reduce like fetch and instead incorporate like these types of chews and licky mats and like tug for a little bit or playing it in a different way or for designated times. And we saw drastic improvements. I actually had a client who the dog wasn't able to sleep through the night, and was just barking out of nowhere all the time, impacting then the owner's also emotional regulation, and she wasn't able to sleep. And we figured out that the fetch was actually a huge contributor. When we switched that around to different types of ways to meet her dog's needs, even though he loved fetch, she was able to sleep through the night with him entirely. So that took some time to figure out. We had to track a few things, try a few things, but it's interesting. And again, I feel like I might get scolded for this episode because I brought up like so many controversial things, but my whole goal is that it just plants a seed of curiosity and being willing to put our ego to the side, myself included, and be like, okay, well, let's always try to evolve and learn and grow. Is there a better way to do it next time? And looking at the overall effect things are having on the dog's physical body, which is connected to their mental health, and thinking about ourselves in that way too. Is there anything that we think is healthy? Like I mentioned when I was learning about high intensity interval training and sometimes cold plunges and sometimes some types of fasting for women can have detrimental effects for certain health conditions going on. And for other people, it can be really healthy and beneficial. So that's, again, where nuance is important to consider. And again, if I was like dead set on, no, I've read that high intensity interval training is great for women, I need to do it and continue doing it, I'd probably feel bad. So it's important to remember in anything that we do that nuance is there. Okay, so now to wrap up this episode, I wanted to go over some real life examples that I've worked with my actual clients on reducing some of these stressors that were impacting both the dog and the human, and how we got kind of creative to reduce both those stressors, which honestly helped, would not only help reduce the chronic stress of the dog, but also of the human. So I had one client who had two dogs that sometimes got into fights, sometimes didn't, and had some separation distress when alone. And she had recently moved, and so we were working through how to give her dogs activities or meet their needs throughout the day. She started a new job and was going to be gone, but also not leaving things out for them to resource guard and fight over. So this was obviously a big stressor for the owner and honestly for both dogs. So we played around with like first making sure when left alone, all toys and things were picked up. We prioritized resource guarding safety over like having some coping skills to chew on and things like that with the separation related behaviors, because in my eyes, how we looked at it, I was like, I think if we're looking at severity here, it seemed like the resource guarding was more of an immediate risk, and the separation anxiety wasn't so bad that the dogs were like panicking into a full-blown phobia. So I was like, I think that's worth kind of going more in that direction to reduce the what if, because they never fought unless it was over resources. And then on figuring out how we can meet her dog's needs before she goes to work, and then again after, but in a way that felt sustainable. So it wasn't like she had to wake up at 4 a.m. and do these crazy things because she couldn't walk the two dogs together. They were reactive for different reasons, and it was just too much. So we worked in instead doing like an intentional 10 minutes of training with each dog in the morning, and then feeding their meals in a different way versus just in a bowl. So that way they might have to like sniff and forage or chew and lick in order to get the food then. And we also mixed in, okay, like some exercise opportunities. So it could maybe one of them go for the walk in the morning and the other for the walk in the evening, and tracked if one of the dogs had less exercise, did any of her behaviors change really? She was a little bit of an older dog, and her behavior didn't really change if she had less exercise. So in our scale of priority of understanding the owner's bandwidth for supporting her dogs. We prioritized one of her dogs over the other for that exercise and meeting the needs because he was a more highly sensitive, high needs dog. And the other one was a little bit more comfortable being like couch potato, kind of chilling. And she just really valued, I think, having the peace and not having this other dog pester her or, try to steal things and fight for her comfy spot. So that's how we prioritized that until she had her partner be able to come home and support her. And I want to also preface this. It's not like when you have a training plan in place that everything goes perfectly. And that's why this work of co-regulation is so important, because it's understanding the human end of it, that you have a bunch of shit going on that doesn't necessarily revolve around your dog. And sometimes our cups are full and we're able to do a lot for them. Sometimes they're in the middle and sometimes they're empty. And if we add into that the amount of people sharing a home with you or the amount of people that you're caring for, especially if you have multiple kids, your bandwidth is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we need to think more strategically of the activities and things that we do having a bigger payoff compared to not necessarily wasting time, but wasting precious time, a valuable resource on things that might not have as much bang for their buck. So we have to be willing to play around with that a little bit. And again, prioritize also not just the dog's needs and not just the owner's needs, but both of their needs, because if the dog's needs are not met, it is going to impact the owners no matter what. And that's where a lot of those behavior issues come up. And again, recognizing like we have work. Sometimes we go through breakups or divorces or arguments, or we lose a job, and all of that stress can make caring about your training a lot like harder. It's like, okay, well, I need to put money on the or get money on the table. So I think a healthy, sustainable training plan addresses the stress for both the human and the dog, and finding those wins that can help reduce the stress overall. We also, for this client, looked at like, okay, vet visits were really stressful for her and for her dogs. And I was like, what would happen if we didn't bring both of them at the same time? Because they would fight sometimes when they were stressed at the vet's office. And I was like, what if we just planned out and you're just working with one at a time at the vets and schedule them out in 2 separate visits? Would that reduce the stress? And it did pretty drastically. So sometimes it just takes an objective third-party eye looking at something. When you're in it, it is so much harder to see, like, I don't know, to see the outcome where you're like, okay, I don't know how to get myself out of this, because you're just in your habits, you're in your routine. And again, if our bandwidth is low, we're going to feel stressed, and it's much harder to problem solve when we feel that way. So once we're able to reduce those big stressors, then the capacity for training can come up, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe just the expectations are reduced, and that can also be a win for a client. It doesn't have to be train your way out of everything. It can just be, let's make life easier for you so you can breathe and you find joy again, and it's good enough for you. Thanks for hanging out with me on the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. If you love this episode, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed, left a review, and shared with a friend. Your support helps more people and their dogs find a little more ease and connection in their lives. Want to dive deeper? Follow me on Instagram at Co-Regulated Canines. That's CO_regulated, the letter K, the number 9, S, or head to www.coregulatedcanines.com for more resources. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your pup, and keep building those connections.